So, Bismillah, in today's debate, we are discussing whether God exists or not. I'll be mainly using three arguments: Kalam, fine tuning, and the intelligent design argument from biological information. Now, in this opening statement, I'll just keep the focus on Kalam and fine tuning because I have to address the argument and some of the common atheist contentions in this debate. So, the first argument I am using for the existence of God is the Kalam cosmological argument. There are three premises, as everybody here knows. Whatever begins to exist has a cause, the universe began to exist, therefore, the universe has a cause. Now, I won't spend much time arguing for premise 1 because I think it's self evidently true, but I'm happy to deal with this in the open discussion. Now I'll just focus on the premise to what the universe began to exist. The simple way I'll argue for this is basically showing that an infinite regress of events cannot happen and an actual infinite cannot be traversed. So the first argument for infinite regress is basically that infinite regress of events cannot happen. If the universe is past eternal, an infinite regress of events has ended. What do I mean by this? This conversation is happening. This is an event that is happening today. All events that are happening today depend on the events that happened yesterday. Those depend on the events day before that, and those day before that, and on ad infinitum. So, if the universe is past eternal, then an infinite regress of events has ended in this conversation, though there may be future events. This is impossible, and I'll give a very simple argument for this. Let's suppose I was to give you a dollar, but I had to ask someone else for that, and they had to ask someone else for that, and they had to ask someone else for that, and this went on ad infinitum. Would you ever get that dollar? In this case, you will never get that dollar. This shows an infinite regress of events cannot end. Now, one contention that can be brought to this argument is that basically this just goes in a forward direction, while in the case of the universe, there's a backward series of causes. This contention does not work because there's a similar example with a backward series of causes. Let's suppose I was to receive an inheritance, but I have an infinite number of ancestors going backward from whom I'll get the inheritance. Before I get the inheritance, my father has to get it. Before he gets it, his father has to get it. Before that person gets it, his father has to get it. Before that person gets it, his father has to get it. And this can go on for ad infinitum in this series. No one will ever get the inheritance for the simple fact for anyone to get it, the person before them will have to get it. Hence, this cannot happen. This shows that an infinite regress of events cannot end. The second argument I'll give for the impossibility of infinite regress basically is this is about impossibility of traversing an actual infinite. Now let's suppose the basically the series of past events to the present in the case of the eternal universe, it's basically analogous to someone counting down from negative infinity to zero, right? Suppose someone was doing this. Now, why does that person count? And suppose he is ending today, right? Why is that person ending today instead of yesterday or the day before that or the day before that? At every point in the past, an infinite amount of time has already passed, an infinite number of numbers have already been counted. So, there is absolutely no reason for that person to be ending today instead of yesterday. Now, these are the two arguments I want to focus on, and I also want to deal with some contentions to these arguments. And the source I'm taking for the contention is basically the two atheist clown documentaries that were made by eminent atheist philosophers and scientists. So, they did not deal with the first argument, they dealt with the second argument of basically counting down for infinity. The contention response they gave was that you basically don't need you can only have a you don't need a full explanation because they don't accept the strong version of the PSR. They accept a weak version of the PSR and on which you can have a partial explanation. So basically the partial explanation was that it is ending today because it was at minus 10 points before today. This explanation is nonsensical. It does not explain anything, and there is a very simple reason for this. If the person is ending today instead of yesterday, it's trivial that that person is at minus 10 points before this. and if this person was ending yesterday instead of today, it is trivial that the person would be at minus 10 11 days before today. This does not explain anything. Moreover, this dodges the question that the person making the argument asks. I can make a very simple point in this regard and basically ask the interlocutor, or the basically ask the atheist in this regard, why are any of these points, why is the person at minus 11 today or at any point in the countdown at their particular positions? If that countdown could end instead of today, instead of yesterday, or it could end the day before that or the day before that, each of those positions would be different. But there is absolutely no explanation given for any of this. This is why the atheist responses don't work in this regard. Moreover, I want to address another major atheist problem in this regard. This is something a lot of atheist philosophers are claiming in this regard. The atheist claim is, for something to be impossible, it has to have strict logical contradictions. The claim is the Kalam cosmological argument does not work for this reason, because it does not have strict logical contradictions. This was the criteria given in the two atheist Kalam documentaries. But this criteria is nonsensical, and I'll have atheists rejecting this in 2 minutes. There's a very simple reason. Firstly, uh, there are certain things that are impossible, even accepted by atheists to be impossible, that don't have logical contradictions. One example is counting down to infinity. Someone cannot start counting at zero and then get to infinity. Everyone agrees with this, and yet there is no logical contradiction in this. Still, it cannot happen. So the atheist criteria is self-refuting. Moreover, there's an even bigger problem here. Why? Because if we take this criteria seriously, atheism is false. Why? There is an axiom in modern logic called the S5. What this axiom entails, that if something is possibly necessary, then it is necessary. What this means is, if the existence of God is possible, then God does exist. There are no logical contradictions in the existence of God. The problem of evil does not prove a logical contradiction, even according to most atheist philosophers. So, by the atheist logic that they themselves are using, existence of God is possible. And if it is possible, according to the S5 axiom, God exists and atheism is false. Now, I only have 2.5 minutes left. I'll just go briefly into the fine-tuning argument. Basically, there are a lot of constants that are necessary, universal constants that are necessary for a complex life-permitting universe to exist. And if these were slightly different, then a complex life permitting universe will not exist, and these constants being complex life permitting is extremely improbable. This is something most scientists admit now. So this is generally understood to be a clear-cut problem in science. The way the clear-cut explanation for this is designed. The two most common atheist responses to this are the multiverse and that the constants are necessary. And these are the responses brought by atheist philosophers themselves. However, there is a major problem here. I'll just deal with the constants being necessary first. I'll deal with multiverse later. The constant being necessary contention does not work. Why? Because according to atheists, if for something to be impossible, it has to have logical contradictions. These constants having different values is not logically contradictory. This is something everyone will admit. If this is the case, then other values of these constants are clearly possible. If that's the case, uh, they cannot possibly be necessary. So, the atheist philosophers, the claim they make with regards to the Kalam cosmological argument, that claim becomes a problem for their contentions to the fine-tuning argument. In short, I think atheism is just one incoherent mess. Moreover, there's an even bigger problem in this regard. Most atheists will have to, basically for one reason to another or another, admit that intuitions are not evidence. I agree with this, but the problem is every single atheist argument, from problem of evil to there being multiple religions, whatever, every single atheist argument is based on intuitions. So I would say I think the atheist position is clearly nonsensical and just based on blind faith. And my time's up. My interlocutor can start his opening statement.
Yeah, I'll just do 10 minutes here. I'll just start a timer. Yikes. Okay. So, you started with the Kalam cosmological argument, right? So you gave three, obviously we know what that argument is. You said premise one is self-evident. I don't see why anyone would think it's self-evident. There was an argument given for that. Right? The second premise, the universe began to exist. You tried to use some of these sorts of philosophical thought experiments that argue against the possibility of past infinitude. So the first kind of scenario you gave was the sort of dollar transfer case, which is pretty much similar to the sniper case. The problem with this is it obviously just assumes that there would have to be some starting point in an infinite past. So whenever you start the thought experiment by saying, "Oh, there's some given person, is going to do something, but in order to do that thing, they require either some sort of permission or some sort of transfer from somebody else." As far as the thought experiment is concerned, that just serves as a starting point. If the past is infinite, there simply isn't a starting point. Not really a relevant thought experiment. I think one relevant one you did give, however, was infinite sort of inheritance in the past. And everybody has now, if there's assumed that there's always been this sort of past infinite transfer of inheritance. And of course, the person will receive their inheritance, right? Because, inheritance has always been being transferred. Right? So I don't see why that's impossible. See, like how you're going to derive the same, contradiction as the previous cases. And if we analyze like what it means for the past to be infinite, if we just take the set of past elements to be, some set, then you could sort of put them in one-to-one correspondence with the amount of whole number integers that are less than zero. And if somebody had always been counting, then at any given point, at any given element of the set, they always have a finite amount of integers from that number they're at till zero. So if the past is infinite, there's never going to be a point where you actually have to traverse an infinite amount of numbers. And so I thought that so that pretty much takes care of the justification for the thing. What else did you say? You were talking about the PSR. I'm not sure that's relevant. The PSR isn't in the Kalam argument. What else? Then you were talking about you're saying something like atheists believe that in order for something to be impossible, it have to entail logical contradiction. Yeah, that's one way something can be impossible. There are different modalities under which things could be impossible. So there could be like physical modalities, metaphysical modalities, things like that. And then you said that was self-refuting because of like the modal ontological argument and the claim that if it's possible God exists, then God exists. Well, on the modal ontological argument, assuming like the S5 set of axioms, it being saying it's possible that God exists or making that sort of possible necessity claim is just logically equivalent to saying that that thing is necessary. So when somebody gives the modal ontological argument, there's no reason anybody would accept sort of possibility premise because that's just the same thing as saying that some being is necessary. So it's just clearly a question-begging argument. Fine-tuning argument. This is kind of like a Craigian rendition of the fine-tuning argument because it says like either the explanation for the fine-tuned constants is physical necessity, chance, or design. First, you said like having different constants doesn't entail logical contradiction. Yeah, that's fine because what's in question would be whether they're physically necessary. And physical modality is a different modality than logical modality, so it's kind of irrelevant. And also, the sort of trichotomy between chance, necessity, or design is actually not a true trichotomy at all because like even if it's designed, that we take that to just mean created by some agent, there's still going to be some ensemble of worlds that the agent is either more likely to create than not, or let's say the agent just necessarily creates some world. And so chance just means some probability distribution. And whether it's created by an agent or not doesn't remove from the fact of it having some probability distribution. Right, so and now if you explain the fine-tuned constants in terms of God, it doesn't seem that there's any like reason as to why God having these sorts of fine-tuned dispositions would be any less unlikely than you having those fine-tuned constants, some sort of brute fact. If that's the case, then all you're doing is just transferring this kind of brute fact and you're not providing any sort of explanatory value. In fact, what you're doing is making a far less simple explanation by using God to appeal to it. Now, if you say like God is necessary or God's preferences or dispositions are necessary, then somebody could have a hypothesis where the sort of dispositions for the universe to have those constants are also necessary. You just have a stalking horse on all the possible explanations you could give for this, and there's no reason to accept one or the other. And so that's pretty much all the arguments you gave. I think all of them are. I don't think any of them really work. But yeah, if that's how much time do I have? I have like 4 full minutes, but we could go through each argument individually. We can kind of like lay them out, and then we could like get through all of this if we're like open discussing. But other than that, yeah, I'm pretty much done.
So should we start the open discussion now?
Yeah, so let's start with the argument you gave for past infinite being impossible. What was the argument for that exactly?
Yeah, the first argument I gave was basically the sniper example or dollar example. I said that you can bring up a possible contention in this regard that it's basically going forward in a sense. Therefore, I gave the inheritance example. So, do you want me to state the inheritance example again, or would you like to respond to it?
Yeah, so I know what the inheritance. Well, so first with the sniper example, do you understand that I'm not this analogy I'm creating with the sniper example actually isn't with the kind of temporal relations considered in it. This analogy I'm creating is the fact that the sniper example just seems to presume that there would have to be some starting point to an infinite past. That's clearly false because that's false by definition of what infinite past is.
Uh, it's about an infinite regress of causal chain, right? You can bring up the point about the starting point, and I don't want to waste time on that because that's not relevant here. So we can just go straight to the inheritance
It is
example.
relevant. The reason
How is
it's
it
relevant
relevant?
is because the reason it's relevant is because if it's an argument, if it's an argument that's supposed to create an analogy for an infinite past to demonstrate it's impossible. If there's something disanalogous with the analogy, then it's not going to be serve as an apt analogy for our conclusion. Because there's a starting point in that analogy, it's not analogous to an infinite past where there wouldn't be such a discrete starting point.
Okay, so basically, I'll give the first. Just give the minor analogy to the infinite past for this point. Then I really want to move to the inheritance example because that's much more easily identifiable with an infinite past. So I'll just give the analogy first. In the case of the dollar example, right? If that person is to receive a dollar, if you are to receive a dollar, I would be receiving that dollar from that I'm giving to you from an infinite number of backward causal chain. That chain is analogous to an infinite past.
Yeah, sure. Now that example is analogous to an infinite past because now you're just stipulating. Wait, well, I take it that you're stipulating that people have always been sort of exchanging this dollar. If people have always been exchanging this dollar, and for any person, let's call that person P, any person who's exchanging the dollar to somebody else, that person only has a finite amount of people to give the dollar to between them and you.
That
So
person
yeah,
has, but in the case of the analogy, firstly, there is no dollar to share. There's always people asking backwards. If you are to get the dollar from me, I would be receiving that dollar from an infinite number of people backwards. So that way, it will be analogous to the eternal past, the series of past events being analogous to each person handing over the dollar, and the end point being today, where I am sharing you the dollar. That's how it is analogous to an infinite past. Now, I think this point is clear. If you want to respond to this, you can respond. We can go
yeah,
to the inheritance
yeah.
example.
So you seem to just like confuse. Like you seem to kind of bring up the first example again. Let's kind of separate the problem here. The first example is, I'm a person who wants to receive a dollar. In order for me to receive a dollar, somebody has to give, or for somebody to give me that dollar, somebody has to give them that dollar ad infinitum. That's the first one. The second case I take it to be people have always been exchanging this dollar. Is that the second example?
The second example was about the inheritance. This is the first example.
No,
Unless we
I'm
are
talking
getting
about the
confused.
iteration. I'm talking about the second iteration of the dollar example.
It's the same iteration as before. That's the point. For in this iteration again, for this discussion, we can skip this and go to the inheritance example because it is much more evident how it's analogous to an infinite past. But since you want to go into this point, for you to receive the dollar from me in this regard, I would basically have to receive it from an infinite of number of people backwards. You want to go into the analogy for this? I think the inheritance example is more than sufficient in this regard to basically show the impossibility of an infinity guess of
Okay.
events.
Okay, so I took it that you were giving a different iteration of the dollar example to address my concern. Sounds like you're just giving the same iteration, which I'm not sure why you do that. But if you want to talk about the
I think you are sure, but
you,
I think we should just like I think the inheritance example is much more clear in this regard. Can I just
okay,
make the argument again so you can respond to the point I basically think you didn't respond? Just let me make it one more time.
okay,
So here is basically the inheritance example. I have an infinite number of ancestors. For me to receive the inheritance, before me, my father has to receive it. Before he receives it, his father has to receive it. Before he receives it, his father has to receive it. In this case, because for anyone to get an inheritance, the person before them will have to get the inheritance. This is why no one will ever get the inheritance in this. Now you can say it's not convincing to you, but again, those are just words. You need to at least respond to the argument. If you can't, you're just in denial. You can
yeah. It
respond.
sounds like you're giving an example where inheritance has always been being transferred. Now, yeah. Now, for if that's true, you could just kind of you know understand it with the same correspondence set terms. Right? So, for any person P who's transferring inheritance, um, when P, for any person P who's going to transfer inheritance to someone, right, there's always going to be a finite amount of people in between the interval from them to you, for which inheritance will be transferred to, if this transfer has always been occurring. I don't see why you're saying it's impossible.
In this case, there's an infinite number of people. Again, I have an infinite number of ancestors from whom each of whom I'll be receiving the inheritance. This is not a finite number, it's an infinite number. I think you're just trying to change the argument because you can't
I
deal
heard,
with it.
I heard the thought experiment. So, did you understand what I said about? Like, did you understand my point about the
I
set
understood the
analysis?
point. Let me just restate it and you can tell me if I
Okay, go
misunderstood
ahead.
you.
Yeah.
The point you made was that any person who will be transferring the inheritance or receiving the inheritance will be receiving from a finite number of people. This is false. In the case of an infinite number of ancestors, I'll be receiving it from an infinite number of people. And again, you are not dealing with the problem here. Before I get the
That wasn't the point.
okay, correct
That
me then.
wasn't the point. Yeah. So the point was like, so imagine the set of natural numbers that are less than zero. That's like -1 to -2, -3 ad infinitum. Right. So you could pick any point in that kind of number line. Let's say you pick -5. Distance of from -5 to 0. Let's call that interval I. That's a finite interval. That's also generalizable to every point on the number line.
We are
In the
dealing
same
with
way,
an
if that
infinite number.
so
We
in
are
the
not
same
dealing with
way,
a
so in the
finite
same
interval.
way, if that transfer has always been occurring, then for any person P, when they transfer inheritance, there'll always be a finite number of people for which the transfer of inheritance will occur over in between them and you. And so on that account, I don't see how it's impossible to have this sort of case where inheritance has always been being transferred.
Okay, firstly, it's not about transferring inheritance, it's about receiving inheritance. There's a distinction here. And again, in this case, it's not the inheritance. If I actually have an infinite number of ancestors, I'm not receiving it from 5 or 10 people. I'm basically receiving it from an infinite number of ancestors. You are just
I
dodging this
know,
point
I know,
and
I don't
pretending
think
you
you're
have disputed
understanding
it. I don't think you understand. I think you understand my point and just dodging it because you can't respond to it.
No, no,
Yeah,
I don't think you're following. But
I
look, the
think I
point
am.
is,
I think you are as
yeah.
well.
So what? Let me explain what's not in dispute. What's not in dispute is the cardinality of the set of ancestors like Aleph. No, that's not in dispute. That's just stipulated in the hypothetical. What is in dispute is, and then you also drew a distinction between transferring and receiving. So we can talk about receiving. Let's say like in order for some person P to receive inheritance, they just have to it has to be the case that the inheritance was transferred to them. Um,
In
and
order
the
to
and
them to receive
whenever
it,
whenever
the person
they
previous to
get the
them has to
inheritance,
receive it.
that's
If
just
I
what
am
we're
to receive
understanding
the
to be
inheritance,
receiving.
my father has to
Now if
receive it.
there's always been people that have been transferring inheritance. For any person P at any given point of the sequence, um, there's only going to be a finite amount of people who have to receive inheritance between that person P and you.
In this case, an infinite number of people have to receive it. That's the point of having an infinite number of
Jesus Christ.
ancestors. Literally
No,
everyone has to
you're
release
not.
it,
No, that's not
receive
tracking.
it.
No,
Of course it is. I
no, no,
mean, to be honest, this is a
no, it's not.
pathetic response, and I wish I could say
No,
I've heard this the first time, but I've heard this the second time, and the last person was actually
no,
making number claims like this
no.
as well.
This
Of course
isn't
it is.
understanding the point.
It's you engaging
No.
in basically
Okay,
reality denial. In
look.
this case,
Maybe
there are
maybe I
infinite
can
number of
kind of help
ancestors.
you. Maybe I can have. Wait, calm down. Just calm down. Maybe I can kind
I
of help
am
you. I don't
calm.
think you're following at all. Okay, so what's the how? Okay, so like imagine the number. Let's say -5 and 0. Is that a finite interval?
Yeah.
Okay, -10 and 0. Is that the finite interval?
Yes.
-100 and 0. Is that a finite interval?
Yes.
Is there any negative number for which the interval between that number and 0 isn't a finite interval?
For the that would be the case if there were a finite number of ancestors. In this case, there's an
No,
infinite
no,
number of
no,
ancestors.
no. The
Yes.
question was,
Yes.
is
Yes.
there
Your
any,
question
is there,
is
is
your
there
question has
any, so
false
one second, is
assumptions.
there any,
S.
is there any,
I think
excuse
your
me, is
name.
there any negative,
Should I call you S or something else?
is there any, excuse me, is there any negative number for which the interval between that and 0 isn't a finite interval?
In this case, there's an infinite number of numbers. There's an infinite number of ancestors. Like
What
this
question
is
are you,
evident.
what question are you answering?
Your question has false assumptions that I'm addressing.
Sorry,
This is not a finite interval.
how
This is
can
an
the question
infinite
have,
interval.
did you understand what my question was?
Yeah, I understood it. And you are trying to change this
What was
into
the
a finite
question? What was the
interval
question?
when you are dodging the
What was,
question that it's an infinite interval.
sorry, what was the question?
In the case of me having an infinite number of ancestors, right? Am I receiving
What
it
was the
from a
question?
finite number of people? Answer my question first. In the case of me
Sorry,
having an
what was
infinite
my,
number of...
sorry, wait, one second.
No,
Wait,
answer my question first.
why are you
Because
dodging my question? What was my question?
your question has false assumptions. You are trying to change the topic
Sir,
and I am not letting you. Answer my
how can
question
a
first.
question have assumptions? What are you talking
Of
about?
course it can.
Look,
That's what a
look, I'm
loaded
gonna give you,
question is.
don't do this weird
As-
thing where I ask you a
as
question.
that is
and then
what
you
a loaded
dodge, and
question
then you,
is.
sorry, and then
It's
you dodge
literally
the
a
question,
logical
and then you
fallacy.
ask me another question.
Is this the best
Answer
you
my
can
question.
do? Est? Is this the best you can do?
Hey,
A
what was the
question
question?
with
What was the
baseless
question I asked
assumptions
you?
is a loaded question. It literally
Are
is
you
a
gonna,
logical fallacy.
are you gonna answer the question?
Are you gonna answer mine?
I can answer yours if you
Okay,
answer the question
thank
I
you.
asked you 5 minutes
Okay.
ago.
Answer my questions. In this case of me having an infinite
Wait,
number of ancestors,
why are you dodging my question and asking me to answer some irrelevant question? What was my? Do you remember
my
what my
question is
was?
relevant. You are trying to pretend that there's a finite number of ancestors
Do
here,
you,
which
sorry,
is just
do you
false.
remember what my? Sorry, do you remember what my question was?
I remember the assumption to your question, which is that
What
there is
was the
supposedly...
question?
Let me
Retard,
address
what was
the
the
assumption
question?
first. Why? Let me address the assumption first. You are
Oh
assuming
my
there's
God.
a finite
Sorry,
number of
what was the
ancestors.
question?
Prove there's a finite number of ancestors in this case. Go on.
What was
Go
the
on.
question?
Prove this is the literal assumption of your question. Prove there's a finite number of ancestors when I have an infinite number of ancestors. Go on.
You're just gonna get banned if you like keep dodging the question.
You literally had to strawman my entire
Alright,
argument because
so
you can't
here,
answer
how about
it.
we start with this? How about we start with you telling me what the question was? What was the question?
Basically, your question was in the case of is there any number from which actually I don't remember the exact words, but what you were trying to say was that coming to zero from can you just rephrase it because I really don't remember the exact words.
Yeah. The question was, is there any number, is there any negative integer for which the interval between that negative integer and 0 isn't finite.
For any integer, no.
Okay, yeah. Now that's true.
That's
now
the
if
case
we
for finite numbers.
understand, now if we
That is the
understand
S.
the past being infinite, sorry, if we
I
understand
answered your question,
the
now
past,
answer
sorry,
mine.
one second. If we understand the past being infinite in a way that we can correspond to these kind of moments of the past, one-to-one correspondence with the set of negative integers. And it's also true that if the past is infinite, for any moment t, there's a finite amount of moments between t and the present moment.
Now answer my question because I answered your first. In the case of me having an infinite number of ancestors, am I receiving the inheritance from a finite number of people or an infinite number of people?
If you're asking like, is the chain of inheritance being, yeah, that's an infinite chain. Yeah,
So
that's
I'm
just
receiving
asking
it
if an
from an
infinite
infinite
past
number
is
of
an
people.
infinite past.
So I'm literally receiving it from an infinite number of people.
Yes.
So again, thank you for admitting
Thanks
that.
for telling us. Thanks
Now,
for repeating what an infinite past is.
In the
Is that
case of
relevant
an
to what I
infinite
said?
past, I have an infinite number of ancestors. First you were denying this. You were saying that I am receiving it from a finite number of people. Now that we agree.
No.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
No. You're not listening. No.
Am I receiving it from an
no,
infinite number of people or not?
No.
I am
you're not
receiving.
listening. No. No. Oh my
S.
God. Stop. No, you're just not. You're just
Here's
like
what's
totally
not going
tracking.
to happen. Either we can both speak
Okay.
without interrupting each other, or both of us can keep interrupting each other.
Okay,
I suggest.
you're just not tracking the. Are you gonna? Okay, you're just not following. I'm not saying that it's not the case that the cardinality. So, like I said,
Dodging
what's
the
not
argument.
being
You're
disputed?
dodging the literal
What's not being
argument.
disputed? What's not
S,
being disputed is that the.
You will have to
what's
address
not
this
being
argument.
sorry, what's not
S,
being disputed?
You will have to address
What's
my
not-
argument.
Oh my God, dude! I'm gonna mute you if you keep like doing this. Like
You will
retard
have to
stuff.
address the argument. Here's what we
Oh my
can do.
God.
S, look, both of us can speak for 2 minutes each.
What's not being disputed is that the cardinality of the set of ancestors is infinite. And it's not what's being disputed. What the point being made is that for any given ancestor, you can call it ancestor P, there's always going to be a finite amount of ancestors for which who will receive inheritance between that ancestor and you. That's generalizable to any given ancestor.
Okay, since I was muted, I couldn't speak. Now I'll respond to this point. In this case, I am receiving it from an infinite number of ancestors, and you are not answering this
Jesus
basic question.
Christ.
Est, you are speaking without me interrupting you, right? Should be I at least allowed the same right? Okay, thank you. So in the case, in basically this example, again, what you're doing is saying that we are receiving that I am receiving it from a finite number of people. You are not dealing with the problem here. In this case, there are literally an infinite number of ancestors. I am receiving the inheritance, if this is possible, from each of those ancestors. Again, deal with this problem. Before I get the inheritance, my father has to get it. Before he gets the inheritance, his father has to get it. Before he gets the inheritance, his father has to get it. And this goes on ad infinitum. In this case, no one will ever get the inheritance, because for anyone to get it, the person before them has to get it. You are not dealing with the metaphysical problem, you are trying to deal with the mathematical issue. And by the way, there's actually, I'll just
I don't know why you just like keep repeating this thought experiment as if we don't know what the thought experiment.
You are dodging it. You are not literally answering the question.
What are you responding?
Ask. We can both interrupt each other, right? Or actually, we can do something. Both of us can speak for 2 minutes each, without interrupting.
I thought you were
each other.
done.
That seems more civilized.
I actually thought you were done.
Actually, you know what? You can speak for 2 minutes. I'll keep quiet and then I'll speak for 2 minutes. On and on.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm not sure what you're responding to. I agree that in this scenario, there's an infinite amount of ancestors. The point is that, like, for any given ancestor, you could point to, on the set, like, because we could sort of formulate this as like a type of ordered set. For any given ancestor, there'll be a finite amount of people, family members, who will receive inheritance between that ancestor and you. I don't see. So you just seem to be repeating what the thought experiment is. And we know what the thought experiment is. But the point is that on, like, the thought experiment of the sort of past infinitude of ancestors, never true that there'll be sort of an infinite amount of ancestors that have to be traversed at it for any given ancestor. So I don't know why you just keep repeating what the experiment is.
You had 1 minute, but I think you don't want to speak. I'll just start my 2 minutes in this regard. Actually, I'll just need 1 minute before I move to the next point. So, in this regard, you are assuming that basically that an infinite number of ancestors in this example don't have to be traversed. This is false. And by the way, I'll make a challenge here. Ask any atheist philosopher, not any mainstream atheist philosopher, not even theist philosopher. Ask any atheist philosopher, they'll say the same thing that I am saying. In this case, an infinite number of ancestors would have to be traversed necessarily. So your response to this simply fails. I think we have discussed this enough. If you want to find some more about this, you're welcome to. As for the second point, my second argument for the beginning of the universe, right? I'll just move on to that. The argument was basically I'm taking the example someone counting down from negative infinity who has always been counting, and that counting ending today. If that person has always been counting, why is he ending today instead of yesterday or the day before that? Because in each of those cases, basically that person has already counted an infinite number of numbers. Why is he ending today instead of yesterday? There is literally no explanation for this, and even if you don't accept the strong PSR, you take a weak version of the PSR, there has to be some partial explanation for this, but there is literally no explanation for why that person is ending today instead of yesterday. And I'll just make a minor point because I have some time left. I think there's someone in the comments saying that infinity is possible basically because mathematics show there is that it's possible. The only thing mathematics show that there is no logical contradiction in it. But that's a criteria atheists cannot accept, because if again I've got because of the S5 axiom, they simply cannot accept this criteria. You can respond. My 2 minutes are up.
Wait, what's the debate? Yeah, we're just talking about like Kalam stuff. Yeah, just a bunch of silly arguments. But yeah, so before we move on to the first argument, I want you to understand the objection to the. Sorry, before we move on to the second. All right, so the first, and then also, I think the second argument just seems silly, but the point was the point that's not being brought up is that there aren't an infinite amount of family members. The point that is being brought up is that for any given family member, it's never true that for that family member, there's an infinite amount of people who will receive inheritance in between that family member and you, who is being kind of marked as the final family member, the present family. Now you could imagine for any given negative integer, a -1, -2, -3, there's always an infinite amount of negative integers before that integer. Right? So the set of negative integers that are less than -1 has a cardinality of LF null. It's true for every negative integer. Right? But what's not true is that the interval of any the interval between any negative integer and 0 is infinite. That's always a finite interval. So if the past is infinite, all it is if we're putting this in correspondence to the set of negative integers. It's just true that for any given negative integer, there's an infinite set of negative integers before that integer. That's true. But what you're trying to say is that you'd actually have to, for any given negative integer, you actually have to go through another infinite of negative integers in order to get to what we're kind of labeling as the present value, which could be 0 or u in the sort of ancestor case. That's just not true. That's just clearly false. You're just not really tracking the point at all. For some reason, you just keep repeating yourself.
Okay, I'll assume that that's your time, so I'll just start by 2 minutes now in this regard. Firstly, from any negative integer, whether it is -5, -10, -100, -1000, -million, there is a finite number of numbers between that and me, the present member of the family. But this does not refute my argument. This does not come close to refuting my argument. If I am to receive the inheritance, I'm literally getting it from an infinite number of ancestors. And this is something not just me saying this is something that even mainstream atheist philosophers will agree with. And I'm challenging on this point, and this debate will be recorded on my channel, that Even mainstream atheist philosophers will agree with what I'm saying here. So your claim is nonsensical. Now, you can just respond to the second argument I made for the beginning of the universe, and yeah, just respond to that.
Um, well, I mean, I guess you're just not gonna get whatever. I guess you're just not gonna understand the response to the first one. So yeah, whatever. We can go to the second. So you're saying that I think you were saying that if somebody had always been counting down, um, if somebody had always been counting down, then seems like if we assumed the PSR, there wouldn't be an explanation for like when they stopped counting. Um, First, I'm not sure how that follows, even if we do assume the PSR. I don't know what argument you could give for that, but I just don't accept the PSR, so I don't care. I don't see what the argument is supposed to be. The argument doesn't conclude with like there's a first. The argument doesn't conclude if the universe began to exist. So I don't see what. I don't even understand how you're arguing for that premise.
Okay, firstly, I would just like to point out fake laughter is not equal to a refutation. Whining and denial is not equal to a refutation. And secondly, again, I stand by my point. Even mainstream atheist philosophers will agree with me on this. Now, you might not accept the strong or even the weak version of the PSR. You don't need to assume the strong version of the PSR. Most philosophers will at least take a weak or a very weak version of the PSR. Even if you do that, there needs to be some explanation for someone who has been counting down from who's always been counting down from negative infinity. Why is that person ending today instead of yesterday? Even on a weak PSR, there is absolutely no explanation here. This is basically you begging for a miracle in this regard. Why is that person ending today instead of yesterday? There is no reason, and even if there is not even a partial explanation, I think most people would agree that it is impossible. Even atheists such as Alex Malpass, they will give a partial explanation because they accept a weak version of the PSR. Most philosophers do that. So you can live in denial and desperation, but denial and desperation will not change reality. Now, as for the point about, now I'll just move to the fine tuning argument, right? I mentioned the atheist criteria regarding impossibility. Go to both those documentaries. They are literally making this claim for something to be impossible, it has to have logical contradictions. The funny thing is, it refutes their contention to the fine tuning argument. Now, the claim I think Est made is that these constants can be somehow necessary. They can't. The previous argument shows the universe began to exist. If it began to exist, it's contingent. It cannot be necessary, so that explanation is out. Now, as far as the multiverse is concerned, that's another explanation given by atheists. That is actually just refuted by Occam's razor. Literally. Atheists have to appeal to Occam's razor to basically argue for atheism that buries the multiverse. So you don't have an explanation, you have nothing in face of fine tuning except blind faith. You can respond.
Yeah, I don't. You seem to be going to a bunch of different arguments, but like, let me respond to the argument you gave the first time. If somebody were just counting down from infinity, there would be no explanation for what day, like they stopped or so. Like, if you said, like, say there was no explanation for that. Let's say, like, yeah, it's true that there would be no explanation for it the day they stopped, or at least not a complete explanation. Oh, sure, but I don't get how that's an argument for the second premise. I don't like. I don't accept it. I don't see a problem with there being like brute contingent facts or so, or brute necessities. So I don't know. I just don't get how you're arguing for that premise. Do you have like what is the argument actually?
Okay, firstly, so I think the fake laughter has stopped, and I think it's for a good reason. But to deal with the argument, right? Here's why all of this is relevant, and I'm not bringing some new philosophical point here. This is something that's pretty much standard. If there is no explanation, absolutely no explanation on a partial PSR, that is impossible. If traversing an actual infinite is impossible, then the universe cannot be past infinite, because if it was past infinite, then an actual infinite would be traversed. The level of stupidity and desperation I'm seeing is truly impressive. Now, Est may not accept even a weak version of the PSR, right? and he can allow for some root contingent facts, but even most atheist philosophers will accept a version of the weak PSR. And if the weak PSR is true, right, even if you can have some root contingent facts, this would require at least a partial explanation. In this case, there literally is no explanation. Why is that person ending today instead of yesterday or the day before that? There is literally no explanation given, and if S thinks there is an explanation, please give it to me. And as for the, he said that I brought up multiple arguments. No, I didn't. I'm not just shotgunning these points. Fine tuning, Kalam, and intelligent design. These are the three arguments we discussed that will be discussed in this debate. So, again, I think Est is looking for brownie points, but it won't help his beliefs.
All right, Jesus. Okay, this isn't work. Okay, so like what we're gonna do is like we'll go through one argument at a time. So we'll start talking about the second argument, and then we'll go through the third argument. So the second argument, granted, this is after you like failing to track the first one, answer the first one. But the second argument is to say that something like if somebody had been counting down from infinite past, then there would be no explanation as to where they stopped counting. Let's say I granted that that's true. What follows from that? That's a question. What follows from that?
I literally answered this point earlier. If this is the case, if there is not even a partial explanation, that shows that this is impossible on a weak version of the PSR. If it is impossible, universe cannot be past infinite. It has to have a beginning. How many times do I have to answer this point?
Okay, but why would we accept the PSR? Like, do you have an argument for the PSR?
I think it's self-evidently true. And as for the point about me failing to answer the first point, I did. Which is why you don't have to just contradict me, you have to contradict most atheist philosophers in this regard. That's how pathetic your position is.
Yeah, and then anyway, self-edit. I mean, I don't like. You can say it's self-evidently true to you. I don't think it's self-evidently true. So I don't know what that's supposed to do for.
Should I
like if I said the PSR is self-evidently false, would that mean we're on a par or?
I would ask for some justification of that.
Could I not just imperatively ask you for the same justification for it being self-evidently true?
Well, here's what I would do in this regard. I would ask you what is your criteria for self-evident truths. You can ask me the same thing. Now, and basically we won't agree on everything. We will have different first principles, and of course we will disagree on these things, right? But at least we can disagree, critique each other's criteria for self-evident truth. Now, my criteria for self-evident truth is very simple. A belief that has been accepted by vast majority of people throughout history. Now, this does not mean it is an intuition, because intuitions can be false, and I'll distinguish between intuitions and my criteria. For instance, you can have a belief that is intuitive, but most people reject it. That won't fit my criteria. Or you have a belief that is not intuitive, yet most people will think it's reasonable and accept it. So that would be my criteria for self-evident truths. Of course, we will have our different first principles. We will have different presuppositions. That will be the case. That will always be the case. But in this case, all we can do is challenge each other's first principles. So you can try to respond to that, and after that, we can go to the fine-tuning argument.
Okay, so a belief that has been accepted by most people throughout history. I don't know why. Like, maybe you can say that's how you're using the term. I don't know why I would care very much if there's like a particular belief, like simplicity. I don't know why I'd care very much about the belief having been accepted by most people. I think usually, if self-evidence, usually is just understood in terms of like deliberative indispensability, or kind of like being very strongly intuitive. That's usually how people understand self-evidence. But I mean, I don't see the PSR as any of those things. And if you don't have an argument for the PSR, like me not sharing your kind of view, I don't know why I'd care about what you're saying.
Okay, firstly, as for the point about caring, I don't care about your views, you don't care about my views. In a debate, whether you care or don't care about something That's both equally worthless. That's just the case. Now, as far as the weak PSR, because for this argument, I only need a weak version of the PSR. That is something even most atheist philosophers will accept. So,
Oh, by the way,
going by that, your
which
position is
weak
dead.
version are you using? By the way.
It will work on any weak version. That's the point. There needs to be some explanation, and in this case, there is no explanation. So,
No, like specifically which, because for example, you know the like the weak version of the Gale Proust PSR just entails the strong version. So you might want to clarify like which weak version you are using.
like I said, it would work on all weak versions because you have to have a partial explanation. Most or all versions of the PS are weak versions. So I don't have memorized them. I don't see the point of memorizing them. But can we move to the fine tuning argument now, or do you want to continue on this?
No, wait 1 second. But I'm saying the problem kind of there is that you do know that the Gale Proust weak version that like in Grandma P's, I forgot what this paper was called. It's been a while since I read it, but that version just entails the strong version, and he does it with the same. The proof he uses to show that is the same proof as the Fitch knowability paradox. But that you might not know about that. But like if you don't accept the strong version, maybe you do. Maybe, but I'm saying like
I
even if you're
accept the
saying it
strong
works on
version
some
and
weak
I'm happy
version,
to deal with the
even if you
contentions
say
to
it
it.
works on some weak version of the PSR, the weak version is just the Gale Proust weak version. Then for somebody who you
Is
think
that the
believes in the
only
weak
weak
version
version?
but rejects the strong version,
Is that
then
the
like
only weak version? You just said that it's just the Gale Proust PSR. Is that the only weak
yeah.
version? Are there different versions? Because earlier you were saying there were different
No,
versions.
that's why I'm asking you to clarify which weak version you're talking about.
This is why I said it will work on all or almost all versions. Why? Because even a minimal partial explanation can be accepted in this regard. But in this case, there is no partial explanation. Now I would like to point out two things you are dodging this
Okay.
entire time. Just let me finish
Wait,
this
what
point.
question was I dodging? Maybe I didn't hear your question.
It's a point you were dodging. Let me just finish it.
Oh, okay.
2 points I think Est has not addressed so far. The point I said that most atheist philosophers even will accept a weak or very weak version of the PSR. This is what he is not addressing. The second point, he is not addressing the point about first principles and certain presuppositions he is going to have, I'm going to have. That's always the case. So you can't falsify these things.
Yeah.
So he hasn't dealt with either of those points. If these points are right, if these points are correct, and if he's not challenging these, then his whining about self-evident truths, it's worthless. Now we can stick to this, or I would like to move to fine-tuning and evolution. Should I move to the
Okay, yeah.
fine-tuning?
So, yeah, the first thing, the points you said I was dodging. Most atheists will accept the weak version of the PSR. I'm not sure about the empirical data on that, but like, let's say that's true. I take it that most atheists, at least in my experience, will like if there's a PSR that's consistent with the, kind of possibility of brute contingent facts.
I think
Then,
you're slightly strawmanning me. I didn't say most atheists. I said most atheist philosophers. There is a distinction.
Okay, whatever. Yeah, whatever. If there's a PSR that's consistent with like the possibility of like brute contingent facts, I don't really and also consist. Yeah, and I might not even have problems with like, those sorts of PSRs. It just depends on the strength of it. But yeah, even on a weak PSR, you can still take it that even if the weak PSR just allows for these brute facts, then you can still say that in the infinite countdown case, it is a brute fact that as to where the person stops counting, the day he stops counting. Hey, that's true, and that could be consistent with some weak PSRs. If it's a PSR that just doesn't allow for the possibility of brute facts, I doubt any atheist, or unless like you're like Amy Karofsky or something, with that type of PSR. But
most atheists will accept, most atheist philosophers will accept at least the need or the benefit or the requirement to give, not exactly necessary. They might accept some brute fact, but at least they will say there should be some partial explanation at the very least here. In this case, there isn't a partial explanation. There is no explanation in this regard. That's the problem. So Again, unless you want to bring up
Yeah.
some
So
contentions to the strong
yeah.
PSR.
So I agree. Yeah. So, but an atheist, like even if you have a version of the weak PSR, right? Um, it could just be a weak PSR that still allows for there to be brute contingent facts. Like you could say something like this. Like even you could say something like it's not the case that all weak PSRs say like everything must have a partial explanation. Like if it's so if here's the disjunct. The disjunct is like if or it's more like a condition. If it's the case that it's the PSR that rules out brute contingent, and that's just not the type of PSR that I will accept, and it's not clear that most atheist philosophers will accept that PSR. And if it's a PSR that does rule out brute contingent facts, then I just don't see why anyone would accept.
Here's the problem
And
for
sorry,
the
yeah, go
you
ahead.
can continue.
Sorry, I meant to say, and if it's a PSR that does not rule out brute contingent facts, then the infinite countdown case will be consistent with that PSR.
Okay, here's the reason most atheist philosophers, even they if they accept some root contingent facts, they will try to at least give a partial explanation because if you don't give a partial explanation, you are just going ad hoc. You are just calling things you can't explain or you don't like the explanation of uh, as a brute contingent fact. It's arbitrary and subjective, and to be honest, quite pathetic.
Wait,
But
ad hocness is it's like an abductive theoretical vice. So I don't know why we're not talking about we're not comparing theories in an IBE sort of way. Like I thought you were proposing a scenario where somebody could have counted down from infinity, and there'd be brute fact as to when they stop counting.
is it rational to
If that's
just
just
okay? You
sorry,
can
what?
continue.
Yeah, and I'm just saying if that's a brute fact, like as long as that's consistent with a PSR that allows for brute facts, then how would it be problematic? The only way you'd be saying it's problematic if it conflicts with a PSR that rules out the possibility of brute facts, and then you just have to give an argument for brute facts being impossible.
Okay, firstly, again, I'll go to the point about presuppositions and first principles and those assumptions, right? With regarding to me needing to give an argument for the strong PSR. Secondly, again, if you just take the position that there are no explanations or you can just arbitrarily take that position, right? You can just assign it to anything. Literally, that's not rational. You can just assign to anything you don't like an explanation of. Like, that's just pathetic. And this is the
Yeah,
reason
I'm not
most
sure. Oh,
just
sorry.
let
Go
me
ahead.
finish this
I didn't.
point.
I thought you were done.
Just let me finish this point. And this is the reason most atheist philosophers will at least try to give a partial explanation in this regard. You can have the last word on this and then we'll move to the fine tuning.
Yeah. So first, I'm not sure what you mean by rational there, and then second, yeah, just because you can accept that there are some brute facts, it doesn't follow from that you accept that anything could be a brute fact. Like that's clearly false. And then thirdly, yeah, I think it's just going to be the same type of additional where if it's a PSR that rules out brute facts, then I just won't. Then I'd want an argument for that PSR. The PSR that doesn't rule out brute facts, then that's not going to be problematic. And if your only reason to say that the PSR is just self-evident, well, it's not self-evident to me. So if it's just that's the only defense of it, I'm not sure what to do with that. So if you want to move on to another argument, I wanted to ask you this before we move on. Even if you granted that there's a first cause, the universe has a cause, how would it follow from that the cause is God exactly? How do you solve the gap problem? Because somebody was asking about that.
Sure. To keep things simple, again, I think I've addressed most of the points regarding what you said, principally regarding first principles and whatever. So there's really no need to waste time on that. As for the gap problem, to be honest, that will be addressed by the fine tuning argument. Now, there are these universal constants.
Oh, okay.
There are these universal constants which basically, if they were different, even slightly different, our complex life permitting universe will not exist. These constants cannot be necessary why the universe began to exist, as the both Kalam infinity arguments show. If the universe began to exist, these are contingent, not necessary. So that contention is out. Secondly, the multiverse is nonsensical, and I'll give a very simple reason for this. It's a philosophical argument, it's not a scientific argument, and I'll give a very simple reason why that's the case. Science is based on observations. Multiverse is by definition outside the observational universe. So it cannot be an argument from science. It is necessarily an argument from philosophy. And in that case, Occam's razor will clearly apply one creator on an infinite number of universes. So that explanation doesn't work as well. It can't be necessary. It can't be chance because of the multiverse. The only option left is an intelligent creator. You can respond.
Yeah, so because this just seems to be the William Lane Craig argument, which I just take to be the worst design argument ever. There's probably far better versions, but yeah. So the first problem obviously is like I could go through a lot of few problems, but like I take it that chance, necessity, or design that's not a trichotomy at all. Sorry, chance, physical necessity, or design. That's not a trichotomy, and we'd have to do
Yeah.
work to actually get a true sort of dichotomy. And another problem here is that you were saying, what did you say? You said the multiverse is philosophical. That's just not true. Like it's a scientific. It's an interpretation of wave function collapse. Well, sorry, it's an interpretation of quantum mechanics. Not because I think many worlds doesn't accept wave function collapse, but basically, just because you can't observe like the entity postulated by a theory. Again, people say this a bunch of times. Doesn't mean it's like not a scientific theory. Science doesn't require like every entity of the theory to be observed. It just requires
Oh yeah, and another thing, if you don't mind me, Texas, just saying one thing.
This is a 1v1 discussion.
That's a one-on-one on my bad. Yeah, go
yeah,
ahead.
that's it. Yeah. So another thing is that like you could kind of make like all that's required is that you predict your predictions, your calculations that sort of derive the entities of the theory are actually fruitful in that regard. So that's all required. That's all required. Sorry, what?
I was just going to say, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. I was going to ask if later you can help me with my server, Texas.
Yeah, I got. Yeah, sure, no problem. Yeah, and so so that's all that's required for a scientific theory. And then you were saying the multiverse would be like less simple. You could say like in ontological simplicity, right? You can compare two different theories, and one theory could have less entities than the multiverse. But simplicity is just one virtue, and you kind of contrast simplicity with explanatory power. I'll just say somebody will respond to you by saying, well, like, look, if you say that there's nothing, the hypothesis that there is nothing, kind of like a skeptical hypothesis, that will be like the simplest theory. But somebody will just deny that it has the explanatory power. So that's kind of what you're missing, I think. But either way, I think the problem is like the trichotomy. That's the main part. So like, do you understand that like saying something by chance necessity design? Sorry, I've been talking for a while, but that's not an actual trichotomy because, like, for example, the design in question, which is the creation by an agent, that itself can be either due to chance or necessity, or that designer could also have been designed by another designer. That's kind of an interest in infinite regress.
Okay, I'll respond to this point. Firstly, address the point about trichotomy. This is more of an inference to the best explanation type thing. You can name a fourth explanation, or you can mix these three explanations, right? Either way, the point about design will have to be there. So I don't think this works. Moreover, if you think there is a fourth option, again, give me that fourth option. You can give that, and this is something I would ask in that regard. Secondly, as for the point about multiverse being science or not, right? And I think I'm really glad you brought this up because I think this will expose the extreme dishonesty and desperation of atheists, and I'll explain why. The reason most scientists and philosophers will try to claim that premise 1 of the Kalam does not work, right? They will say that it's possible that conditions outside the universe are different and that something can come from nothing. If our science is to apply beyond the universe, you have to necessarily assume that the conditions within the universe and outside of the universe are similar. If they are not, our science would not apply. So, by trying to use an argument from science for the multiverse, in this regard, what you are basically assuming is that conditions outside the universe are similar to conditions inside the universe. Moreover, supposedly the conditions are so different that something can come from nothing beyond the universe, yet so similar that our science can apply. One of these two things has to go. That this is just Like this shows the dishonesty and desperation of atheists, because both of these things, you cannot take both of these. You have to forget one of these things necessarily in this regard. So I think that's out. As far as the point about there being an infinite regress of designers, right? I could just say that to avoid that, there has to be one ultimate designer. So that point doesn't work. Uh, because of the problem of infinite regress, there has to be one ultimate designer that always exists, that's necessary, that never not exists. That would be my response to this. Secondly, I think the last point was that you could have basically something coming from nothing, and that would be the simplest explanation. The Occam's razor, as far as I know, is not that the simplest explanation is correct. It's that given all else is equal, the simplest explanation is preferred. In the case of something, so you can't just bare bones appeal to Occam's razor without demonstrating or giving reasons for that all else is equal. That's when Occam's razor literally applies. So this point doesn't work. I think I'm forgetting one more point that was made. Yeah, the last point was basically regarding this is an assumption. This is, I think this was slightly brought that and this is usually brought in regards to fine tuning. Basically, how God would choose to create, how God would create, not create, or how God would do things and would not do things. Right? Would God choose to create a fine tuned universe, etc. This does not work, and atheists cannot use this, and I'll give a very simple reason. This entire argument, from start to finish, is based on intuitions. You have an intuition of how God would act and would not act. Now, do you take intuitions as evidence? If you do, then you will have to accept the existence of God, because that is intuitive. You have to accept life after death. That is intuitive. You have to accept life being designed, because that is intuitive according to atheist biologists themselves who rejected design. So, again, pick your poison in this regard. You can respond.
This is getting okay. So this is getting out of hand. So we need to go. We actually need to go. I think one point at a time, because like this whole list of points and list of responses is like a bit weird. So let's start with this point. Universe being either due to the fine tuning being either due to chance, necessity, or design. Not a The reason that's not a trichotomy is because the design itself could either be due to chance or necessity. And design itself could also be due to design as well. But either way, I could phrase it like this: an example of a true dichotomy could be either the universe is either the fine tuning is due to necessity, or it's not due to. Right? So either P or not P. It's the law of excluded middle. But it's not the case that it's either chance, physical necessity, or design, because this is one point some people like to bring up. It could also be metaphysical necessity, which would mean that there's another option there aside from physical necessity. But let's just say like we're using physical necessity and metaphysical necessity to be the same thing to bolster Craig's argument. I think what you actually want to say is either it's due to necessity or it's not due to necessity. I'm just saying what you said is just not a trichotomy.
Okay. Firstly, as for me addressing 5 points, right, it's getting quite long because you brought 5 points. That is why I have to address each of them. Now, I agree we should just stick to one at a time. Let's deal with this trichotomy first. Again, the simple response is give a fourth explanation. You said that design can be due to chance or design itself. Instead of making that categorization, I can just keep it design, in which case there is design, chance in which there is chance, and necessity in which there is necessity. The type of categorization we take in this regard is entirely subjective. So I don't see why you need to waste time there. And in your categorization, right? Even in your categorization, I can take it design due to design. I can take that categorization in that regard. So this seems to be a waste of time, but you can respond.
No, listen. The reason it's not a trichotomy is because the design option of the three could either be due to chance or necessity. Right. So look, the problem is a trichotomy is sort of like you could say P or Q or R. It's a disjunct where all three of the options are mutually exclusive. So only one of those three options could be true. However, if on the design end, on the design part of the disjunct, the design could be either due to chance or necessity. Right, so it's not the case that only one of them could be true. Something could be designed and be by chance. Something can be designed and be. In order for it to be a trichotomy, only one of them could be true at one given time. However, both, like obviously, two of them could be true. Like two of the disjuncts could be true. So in that case, it's not a trichotomy. What would work if you just said either it's due to chance or necessity? That would work because that would be a dichotomy. However, the trichotomy thing just doesn't work because something could be designed and be by chance, or it could be designed by necessity.
Okay, just to address this point, we can increase the number of options. We can have pure design, pure chance, pure necessity, chance and necessity, chance and design, necessity and design. We can increase those options as many times as we like, right? The argument is you said that chance and necessity is a dichotomy that ignores the possibility of design or a mind being behind it. What I mean by design is there is a mind
No,
or a choice in this regard. This is what I mean by this. And the fact that it cannot happen by necessity, cannot happen by chance mainly. That doesn't mean there can't be some necessity or some chance involved, but mainly it cannot be due to chance or necessity. Shows there has to be mind behind it. You can respond.
Okay, well, let me understand. So by chance, I just mean an event occurring where that event has non-zero probability of occurring. That event is not necessary, or something like that. So that event could have also not occurred. That's what I mean by chance. By necessity, I mean that event must have occurred modally speaking. Are we using the terms in the same way there?
As far as chance, yeah, I think we are. As far as
Okay, cool.
necessity, I think you said that basically it can be metaphysically necessary. Well, I would just say in response to that, it can't be metaphysically necessary because the universe began to exist, therefore it's contingent. That would be my response. You can respond to this.
No, that's such a confusion. Like something beginning to exist doesn't mean it's contingent. But aside from that, there's a few problems though. So like, look, if we're understanding chance in the same way, and we're understanding necessity the term the same way, even if we disagree on the universe being necessary, like we're using the term in the same way. Point is that if something is designed, the design, let's say that design just mean created by a mind. It could be necessarily created by a mind, or it could be like contingently created by a mind. It could be created by this sort of mind, but it's not the case that the mind, for example, the mind could have decided to create fine-tuned constants, but the mind could have also not created fine-tuned constants, and the mind might have selected with like whatever agency it has in some sense to create these fine-tuned constants. That would also be by chance because there's a non-zero probability of the mind creating either outcome. So the reason chance, design, or necessity is not a dichotomy is because the design can be either due to chance or necessity. So that's just the problem. And in order for something to be a trichotomy, only one of the options can be possible. But on this case, like clearly two of the options can be possible at the same time. Unless it's like some sort of unless it's like you might know the difference between an exclusive and an inclusive disjunction. An exclusive disjunction will just say P or Q, an inclusive disjunction will say P or Q or both. So you could say something like it's an inclusive trichotomy. You could say like P, Q, or R, or P, Q, and R, or P, and you could say something like that, but it's not an exclusive trichotomy. That's the type of argument Craig wants to run because he wants to say it can't be either of these two.
Okay, firstly, as for the point about it being contingent, you said that is wrong. I don't think so. If universe began to exist, I think that shows it's not necessary and it's contingent, and we can take different interpretations of or different meanings of what means by necessary and contingent. There are different philosophical views on this point. Again, this would be, I think, an issue of first principles. There's no point wasting time on this. If you want, I'm happy to do that. I don't have an issue with that. But I would say that if something began to exist and didn't exist, then it exists, then it is contingent because of that. Secondly, your point about your entire argument about this being not a trichotomy, I think that's nonsensical. You said that it could be a contingent mind, could be a necessary mind behind it. Let's say we I can agree with that. But what the fine tuning constants will show, there is a mind behind it, because again I disagree with the classification you are making in this regard. I think chance and necessity in their different forms, even if there is some a mixture of chance and necessity. For instance, most biologists will say that evolution is a mixture of chance and necessity. Even if you have that, you can have things like that, but there is clearly the possibility of design, and I think these constants are necessarily
No,
explained by design.
I didn't. So I don't deny it's possible for there to be design. I don't think you're grasping the point. The point is that like it could be the case that the mind that designs the universe, it could be a case that like let's say the mind could choose to create constants. Mind could also not create constants. There could be a non-zero. There could be a probability. Let's say the mind has a 60% chance of creating a world of constants and like a 40% chance of not creating a world of constants, as an example. That would be an example of the design being by chance. There's non-zero probabilities of different outcomes. The mind selects one outcome. Now, the design could also be necessary. For example, the mind could be, let's say the mind will create these constants with 100% probability. There's no other outcome that the mind could create. That would mean that the design is necessary. Right? So the design itself could either be by chance or by necessity. It's not now saying that is not excluding. Notice how that's not excluding the possibility of design. It's just saying it's not an exclusive trichotomy. Two of the options could be true at the same time.
I think I pretty much agree with this part of this earlier when I said you could have chance, you could have necessity, you could have design, you could have a mixture of these things. As for the point about how mind would choose or would not choose to do things, again, that is an entirely subjective claim, because a mind can choose to do a lot of the things in a different way. What we are asking is how are these constants explained? The point about how a mind would choose to do things or God would choose to do things, again, that would be entirely based on intuitions, and you don't take them as evidence, so that's a waste of time according to your own criteria.
I don't think you followed that. I was just saying. Look. So wait. Do we agree that the design could either be by chance or necessity? Do we agree on that?
uh, by necessity, do you mean a designer is like being forced to create by something? Is this what you mean?
By necessity, I just mean like modal necessity. So the designer chooses to create constants in all possible worlds, basically.
uh, Again, in this regard, I would just say that the constants are contingent and not necessary, so I won't accept
Okay,
that
yeah,
necessary
exactly.
well
So
explanation.
and by contingent we mean um they could
Could
possibly
be different.
they could have been there, possibly they could not have been there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, exactly. Now if you take them to be contingent, that just means that you think a designer could have also created something else, which means that the design on your view is by chance. Maybe it's but either way,
No,
like I'm just pointing out, do we agree that the design could either be by chance or necessity? We agree on that now, right?
I don't think so. The reason being, the designer could have chosen to, like I said, necessity is ruled out. So these constants can either be by chance or by design.
No,
I don't
no, you're
get your
not. I'm
point.
asking. But you agree, like I'm asking, do you agree that the design itself, which is the act of the designer creating constants, you agree that you agree that either the designer could have created a world without constants, or the designer could have just like necessarily been disposed to create that world, right? So either the design could be due to chance itself or necessity. You agree with that?
I don't agree with the terms being used. Here's what I will agree with. God could have chosen to create a world which has no life, or which has different constants, or which has basically things going
Exactly.
by a miracle. God could have chosen
Yeah.
to
So
do
there's
these things.
yeah.
But in this case,
Yes.
the two options are not chance and necessity. You are excluding design as an option. Like,
No, 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 no. Listen, listen. So, like, look, you agree God could have created a world without constants. Okay, so there's the chance for it. You agree that the design could have been by chance. Okay. Now, could
what
the
do you mean
design have
by.
been?
Here's the thing. I agree with the first part that God could have created a world with different constants or whatever. I agree with that.
Yeah.
I don't think I agree
Now,
with the second part.
Okay, you don't think so? You don't. Yeah. So on your view, you don't think that anything like you don't think the design could have been necessary. I mean, that's fine. It might be on your specific view on theism, the design couldn't have been necessary. But there could be a view of theism where the design could be necessary. For example, if you're a theist, believe God created the constants, and you're a necessitarian, then you're going to believe that the design is necessary.
But I don't take that
So
view.
fine. Yeah, fine. I'm not saying you have to take that view. I'm just saying Craig's argument, all it's arguing is that either the design is due to either it's the fine-tuned constants are due to chance, necessity, or design. Even if you don't take that view, it's still true on Craig's argument that that's not an exclusive
Here's the
tautology.
thing. I think you should realize this. I am not making Craig's argument because, to be honest, he won't argue with the things about multiverse and etc. He won't do these things the same way I am doing. Deal with
You know
my
that
argument.
the argument you're giving was made by William Lane Craig, you know.
But it is different from his because he won't make these the certain claims regarding
No,
multiverse,
it's
etc.
the syllogism is literally like identical. It's the same.
Syllogism can be same, but different arguments can be used for it. Literally.
Yeah,
like,
yeah. You're just saying you're making different sort of supporting arguments. That's fine.
and I've
But I think, yeah, but I don't think we disagree here. You're just saying you don't, on your view, the design can't be by necessity. But
I
it
think
could
we
be
do
on
disagree
syllogism.
here because, to be honest, the simple reason I think we disagree is that you want to define design out of the possibilities and you're just ignoring that. But again, we have discussed
Yeah,
the point
but-
about trichotomy like a lot. We have, I think, 4 other points left. Yeah, we had 5
Yeah.
points. 4
So
of
let's
them are
talk
left.
about. Well, let's see if we can. I don't know, because I think we agree on that. Now here's going to be. So you're saying. So now I think the true dichotomy would be either it's due to chance or necessity.
Again, you have
Because
excluded
the
design.
because like you just agreed, the design could have either been due to chance or necessity. Now you're saying on
I
your
said
view,
it's
on
not
your
due
view,
to
on the God
necessity.
you believe in, on the
As
God you believe in. Sorry, what?
I literally said that I don't think it's due to necessity, and the reason I said it's not due to necessity is that universe is contingent. Like,
No, you're saying that's saying on the view that you believe in. I agree. I'm saying the design could be due to this. That's just,
yeah, but
You're just
again,
trying-
we would have different first principles, and the reason I would say that the universe is contingent and not necessary because it began to exist. This is
oh my
just
god, I don't think this is relevant. But like, look,
I think
I
this,
don't
but
even
to
know
be
what to do.
honest, like, can we move on to multiverse and the other stuff? Because to be honest, I don't even remember 2 of the other points. I remember Occam's razor was one of the
Yeah.
points we need to discuss, and multiverse is
I'm-
another.
well, I'm just saying I just don't know how to like I don't think you even understand like kind of points here. So it's kind of weird to have the conversation because I'm not sure you're like following anything.
I think I do. I think you do as well. But I think this is just a long detour. Uh, can we just move on to the multiverse now? Because
What is the multi? Are you just saying that like I mean, like we could, but I don't see how the multiverse. I don't believe in the multiverse. So why would I?
but you did say it's a scientific argument, right? I said it's not. I gave
Yeah,
a
it's a
reason for it, and you can respond
Yeah,
to
but-
that.
Yeah, because you have a weird. I don't think you understand. Like maybe you have a view of science where you think everything a theory postulates has to be observable, but that's just not how I understand science.
Can I just
If that's just a,
can I just restate my argument and then you can respond?
oh my god. Okay.
Because I think this is important. I gave a very simple reason why the multiverse is not science. Because of the observational thing, and he pointed that out, but he didn't address the second point and why that's relevant. The reason atheists have been claiming for literally decades that something can come from nothing is that conditions outside the universe are different from conditions within the universe. The multiverse argument necessarily assumes that conditions outside the universe are similar to conditions within the universe. Which is it? Either you can have the multiverse or you have to let go of the contention to premise 1 of the Kalam. You can't have both. You can respond.
Yeah. So that's just false. The multiverse doesn't assume that conditions in our universe apply to conditions in other universes. The multiverse, or you could say like many worlds interpretation, it's just an interpretation of quantum mechanics. So it's a model, and all it says is that like kind of like the appearance of wave function collapse, you can explain that in terms of all the potential regions, all the potential regions an electron could appear in when the wave function is collapsed by measurement. For each potential area the electron could appear in, that electron actually is in that area in some different universe. So it's an explanation of it's an explanation of measurement problem or solution to the measurement problem. It's not saying that the laws in this universe apply to are the same as the laws in other universes. It's just saying that the region the electron could occur in. There's infinite universes where one probabilistic region of where one area the electron could appear in appears there. Like you can imagine, for all the areas the electron could appear in, there's an infinite set there. It's uncountably infinite, and for each area, the electron is there in a different universe, and that's just the hypothesis.
Okay, I'll respond to this point. Unless you want to continue.
No, that's just it.
Okay, I'll respond to this point. Quantum mechanics and all of that, right? The quantum world and all of that science, is that within the universe or outside the universe? It's within the universe. Again, for our science to apply, for all of this apply, the conditions beyond the universe necessarily have to be similar to conditions with the universe. You are taking certain interpretations of quantum mechanics, basically assuming they can apply outside the universe, but those things, the quantum mechanics and its interpretations, are interpretations of stuff within the universe. You necessarily have, if you are using science for the multiverse, there is no way around this. You have to assume conditions outside the universe are similar to conditions within the universe. This is something that atheists have been denying for decades. For the multiverse, you necessarily need this. There is no way around this. I mean, to be honest, this is like 2 plus 2 equals 4. There is just simply no way around this.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I know. I think we've been talking for about an hour and a half. So I mean, look, I don't know what if you have we can kind of end. You could give your closing statement. I don't really have anything else, but you can kind of give a closing statement if you want. I don't know.
Yeah, sure. I was hoping to get into evolution and intelligent design. Maybe we can, or someone else here can do a second debate on that. As far as the entire discussion is concerned, again, we basically discussed Kalam and fine tuning, and we mainly went to the arguments of beginning of the universe. I don't think any of those were addressed, and especially the first one, that entire argument was dodged. For the second, again, the PSR was brought, and although my interlocutor does not accept the weak version of the PSR, most atheist philosophers will say at least there should be a partial explanation. This was the entire claim made in the atheist Kalam documentaries, which is refuted. Secondly, we discussed fine tuning again. Most of the contentions there were a waste of it was time wasted on a trichotomy. Again, I don't think my points were addressed, specifically the points about the atheist criteria regarding impossibility. I think that was dodged the entire time. The point about multiverse, I think that the atheist position is self-evidently nonsensical. Again, I think things are pretty much clear from the debate. I'll end my closing statement.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I don't really have anything else to say, but yeah.